Welcome back to the Forum on Gambling Harm. It's a collaboration between RMIT, that owns this beautiful theatre, the Capitol Theatre, and the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria, who have supported this forum and have organised our speakers for tonight. Now, we've talked about the types of gambling, we've talked about the people who gamble, we talk about the people who have been affected. It's not just the people who do the gambling themselves, but what to do about it. And this is one of the most important parts of this forum, what to do. So what we'll hear over the next few minutes is some ideas about it, about how to stop it, but then we'll get some reaction about that as well. I think at this point, if we're going to be talking about what to do about problem gambling, and I'm talking problem gambling here, you know, people like to have a flutter on the horse. Not all gambling is something necessarily to be demonised, perhaps. Maybe it is. Be interesting to hear what you think. But a lot of people do it in a very small scale, $2 on the Melbourne Cup. But if it gets to a problem, how does the brain work? We heard from a group of people who have had problems with gambling over the years, but there have been studies, and Dr. Mark Harrelin, who's from Gamblers Help, is a counsellor from Anglicare Victoria. We heard from him earlier in the night, has looked at this issue and how the brain is actually affected by gambling. So, Mark, how does it work? How does gambling affect the brain?
This is not my particular area of neuroscience. I have a PhD in neuroscience and biochemistry, but I do understand the research, and I'm going to speak about it now in fairly broad strokes. One of the most important things that occurred was that between the iterations of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness 4 to 5, which is a North American psychiatric manual.
Sounds like a lot of fun reading. Yeah, good.
It's a scintillating read. Gambling was moved from the impulse control disorders not otherwise specified, as it was previously categorised, into the substance abuse disorders. So
there's a relationship between the physicality of both of those things?
Well, previously it's my understanding that it was sort of thought about in terms of being sort of like an obsessive compulsive disorder, in terms of a compulsion. We talk about compulsive gamblers, and this is a simplification of the research, because you can talk to people like Professor Murat yourself for a much more in-depth analysis. But studies showed that gambling affected the impulse control centres of the brain, one that's called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, in a way that looked more like alcohol dependence disorder and other drug disorders than it did obsessive compulsive disorders during a compulsive episode. So gambling, much like alcohol and other drugs, affects a part of the brain which is the reward pathway, or, as it's known, the mesocortico-limbic dopamine system within scientific circles. Dopamine's a very important neurotransmitter. It's what gets you up in the morning. It motivates you, it gives you movement, but it's also related to pleasure. So it's related to food, drugs of addiction, sexual activity, things like that, but it's also related to gambling. And so some of the early fMRI and PET scan studies showed that when you put somebody with a gambling addiction under a brain scan and gave them a gambling task, and you put someone with a cocaine addiction under a PET scan and gave them small amounts of cocaine, I'm not sure how that's ethical, but nevertheless, it lit up a part of the reward pathway which was called the nucleus accumbens, which releases huge amounts of dopamine in the presence of rewards.
So it works, that's very interesting. So it works in the same way as all the things that we love to do, the same as all the things that are naughty that we know we shouldn't do, but we do. So gambling fits into that kind of thing. That's what you're saying. It's the way the brain works.
Neuroscientists now conceive of gambling, and there are other types of behavioural addictions that are on the coming up editions of the DSM as process addictions, because this gives us a window into addiction without a chemical intermediary.
Dr. Halloran, thank you very much for that. Judy Avasia is from Three Sides of the Coin. She's coordinator. What they do is that they work in theatre and they act out their harm. Is this something that, in acting out the harm, ties into this, that it's actually you're getting something good out of, for your brain that is, out of the bad stuff that you perhaps have done, or the bad habit that, with dopamine and all the other sort of things, does to your brain? Is that what it does?
Well, I think that's the eventual outcome. I think the process is more, people don't come to us because they want to be actors. They come because they want to be among peers, be among people who've had similar experiences, share those experiences, find confidence in themselves, regain their expressivity and their meaning and purpose in life. And through this whole process of transforming people's stories into theatre and then taking those theatrical scenes into the community and into the professional sectors, they see the impact that they have and how they've been able to transform a very negative experience into something of positive impact.
So do you see success in what happens? Do you see, I imagine there'd be recidivists who go back to gambling after doing what they do with you, but do you see overall it's a pretty successful thing for people to have to not only confront what their demon is, but actually by acting it through and doing it in front of people, that can actually have a curative effect?
Yes, I don't think we are the first port of call for people who are looking to heal from their gambling, to recover. I think we are a stage further along the path once people have, gone to counsellors or done all other things. But when they come to a point that they feel that they are ready to actually expose their story to the world, I think it's a bit further down the track.
Okay. Dr. Mark Zunzak, who we spoke to a little bit before, what do you say about these kinds of things? I'd imagine you'd heard about this kind of way of people addressing their addiction, their gambling addiction.
Look, these things are important to empower people and help them when they have been harmed by gambling. But I think we need to also focus on the role that the gambling businesses play in the harm as well. At the end of the day, these are businesses that are profiting from this harm, so we need government to step up and put in place further measures to rein in this harm and prevent the harm from occurring in the first place. So it's very important to have measures to help people once they've been harmed, but the more we can do to prevent, and part of that is reining in the behaviour of these gambling businesses.
But if people are addicted to gambling, if you do cut down the places they can go to, surely they're going to go somewhere else.
Well, the issue here is to stop people getting to the point where they've developed a serious addiction and that harm. So basically, for sports betting, it can be reining in the saturation marketing, the kind of predatory targeting that's been done, where you've had some of these companies, well documented here, approaching people they know who are being harmed by their gambling, offering them inducements to come back to gamble more. So reining in that kind of behaviour. For pokie venues, it's quite clear that in many cases they can identify the signs that people are being harmed. So getting them to intervene earlier to help people steer away from that path of being harmed. Rein in the amount you can lose. Currently, you can lose $5 every 2.5 seconds with a button press. We're saying bring that down to $1 as even just a starting point. Give local communities more control about how many pokies are pushed out into their communities.
As we're seeing with Darebin, obviously.
Absolutely.
And so obviously you would not be a big fan of Joan Kerner's move with the pokies all those years ago.
No, I think that was a dreadful mistake in introducing pokies into our state, but we are now unfortunately seem to be stuck with them, but we think we should be giving local communities a lot more say about whether they want them and how many get pushed into their area.
Okay, well, there's a few people who have got comments on some of those policy changes and what needs to happen. We'll find out more about that. We'll hear from them after the break. This is the Gambling Harm Forum coming to you from the Capitol Theatre in Melbourne. We'll be back in a minute.